When communism was, in quotes, defeated and the Cold War ended, many believed a great future was at hand for all mankind. U.S. State Department official Francis Fukuyama went further when he concluded that the end of the Cold War meant an end of history, since history was nothing but humanity's struggle for the right ideology. Now, no veritable alternative to a capitalist democracy existed. After the unquote defeat of communism, free men around the world felt safe. The unquote victorious American enjoyed a false sense of prosperity and freedom. However, a new frustration began to surface, one reflected in a short paragraph that appeared in the press. Joe Smith awakes having set his alarm clock made in China, shaves with his electric razor made in Hong Kong, puts on a shirt made in Sri Lanka, designer pants made in Singapore, and tennis shoes made in Korea, prepares his breakfast in electric skillet made in India, and sits down with his calculator made in Mexico to work on his budget. After setting his watch made in Taiwan to the radio made in India, he drives his car made in Japan and continues his search for the American job. At the end of a disappointing day, he relaxes by putting on his sandals made in Brazil, pouring himself a glass of wine made in Chile, turning on his TV made in Indonesia, and then wonders why he cannot find a job in America. Economist Paul Craig Roberts writes, in quotes, "American communities are losing manufacturing jobs. Americans who used to make things for a living now have part-time jobs at Walmart selling items made abroad, and maintain their consumption by spending the equity when refinancing their homes. In the past 5 years, mortgage debt has risen 55%. Total personal debt now stands 100% of personal income. The United States has made the transition from the accumulation of wealth to the consumption of wealth." By Conservative Chronicle, February 22, 2003. What is true for the individual in the above case is also true for the country. Massive U.S. trade deficits are being financed by the transfer of American assets to foreign lands. Everyday Americans hand over $1 billion in treasury and corporate bonds, real estate, and corporate equities to foreigners. How long will the illusion of prosperity and peace endure before Americans living it up importing inexpensive products paid by large trade deficit realize that the merchandise they purchase is no longer easy on the pocketbook and their dollar continues to lose its value? How long will it take before trade deficit in America, once the world's greatest creditor and now world's greatest debtor, affects the living standard of every citizen? Publicist Pat Buchanan had concluded that as Congress voted for tax cuts, spends billions to bail out debt-beat countries and assists decaying international banks, Americans will face a serious economic crisis. While apostles of globalization, such as Thomas Friedman, believe that exporting the idea of free markets and political democracy increase prosperity and peace through the developing world. Professor of International Trade at Yale University, Amma Chua, argues the opposite. In her book, World on Fire, researched and experienced as a Chinese brought up in Philippines, Chua concludes that instead of peace and increase of prosperity, free market brings about ethnic conflict and ugly violence in developing countries. In Asia, Africa, Russia, and Latin America, a free market has created above all a new class of immensely rich plutocrats who are mainly members of a minority group, Chinese in Philippines, Croatians in former Yugoslavia, whites in Latin America, Indians in East Africa, Jews in post-communist Russia. Chinese-speaking citizens make up only 1 to 2% of Philippine population, yet own the majority of the country's business assets and live secluded in a luxurious world fenced off from the indigenous majority, whom they hold in contempt. The same situation existed in Indonesia. The Chinese made up 3% of its vast population, yet owned the great majority of all businesses. The dictator Suharto and his family has lucrative ties to Chinese community. When his government fell in 1998, democratization set off a vicious pogrom against the Chinese. When most of them fled to Singapore, the new Indonesian government expropriated 58 billion of their assets. In other words, the market-dominant minorities in the third world becomes targets of envy. Adding democracy to this violent mix unleashes suppressed ethnic hate and brings to power ethno-nationalist governments that pursue aggressive policies of confiscation and revenge. Ex-communists around the world take delight in such developments. They see capitalism digging its own grave. Marxists define America as imperialistic. She controlled the sources of the world by neo-colonization, etc. She exploits former colonies and backs corrupted regimes, resulting in favorable conditions for inevitable Second World Socialist Revolution. Communists behind the former iron and bamboo curtains from the Czech Republic to the People's Republic of China have never been defeated. They have only retreated to take a deep breath, to acquire Western technology and develop new tactics toward the conquest of the world. In the Czech Republic, for example, an agreement was made with dissident Vaclav Havel to vote him as President of the Republic, orchestrate their velvet revolution, and establish their phony postcommunism. 13 years later, the communists again were decisive in the election of Vaclav Klaus as the second Czech president. And comparable situation exists everywhere in post-communism, where communists govern as capitalists and democrats, as the case in Poland with Kwasniewski, in Ukraine with Kuchma, in White Russia with Lukashenko, in Azerbaijan with Shevardnadze, and in China with Hu Yitao. In the rest of the world, where communists and their collaborators are not fully in power, it is the socialists who prepare the ground for revolution. Europe is already under their spell. The bureaucratic European Union will complete their absolute rule. In South America, the continent is on fire with strikes, terror, and bankruptcies. Narcotic trade financed guerrillas carry out battles with bourgeoisie governments. Southern Asia, impassioned by class and territorial conflict and armed with weapons of mass destruction, smolders before exploding. The Near East, the gas station of the world, and the permanent area of Arabs and Jews, in the source of all terrorism, as witnessed by the destruction of thousands of lives in New York's World Trade Center and Washington Department of Defense. As Lenin claimed a century ago, the object of history is nothing but who gets whom. History continues. The world is on fire. And this was written by Professor Libor Brom.